welcome back to CinemaSpection. I'm Tim.
I'm Chris.
I'm Sarah.
This week we're discussing Back to the Future, or
How I Learned to Stop Complaining and Love My Oedipus Complex.
here's a little bit from the trailer.
Marty leads an ordinary life.
No McFly ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley.
Well, history is going to change.
And 1985 is not his year. But Dr. Brown is about to change all that.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
He's sending Marty 30 years back in time.
It worked!
Great Scott!
I've seen this movie tons and tons of times. You, Chris?
I was 1 year old when this came out, and I saw it 5 times that year. I mean, yes, I've seen it a lot as well.
I've only seen it the one time.
Yeah, Sarah's a virgin.
All right, well, in that case,
She
Sarah,
got 1.21 gigawatts of... I won't go there.
and we were all there to see it. It was impressive. So,
Yes,
Sarah,
yes, there was a very, very large amount of cleanup required.
Sarah, what did you think on your initial viewing?
I loved it. It was pretty cool.
Chris, how about you? I mean, having seen it many
Oh,
times.
God, well, I could get into this a little more, but the last time I saw this movie all the way through was probably before I was even in college to be a mechanical engineer and, take mechanical engineering out of it, and where I am now at a company that deals with electrical engineering and more specifically high voltage power electronics, and even more specifically things like klystron tubes and tube amplifiers and all that other stuff, and just to come at the movie from that direction where Doc Brown is basically the owner of my company, kind of running around with these wild ideas that eventually work. The movie science is definitely there. A lot of the things, the fact that it's gigawatts and not gigawatts is always really, really funny to me watching this movie now, but it just makes it so much more otherworldly and different and something new. But just to see, the copper braid that they use for the high voltage connections and the high current paths, and it's like, nerd alert. It's wonderful to see it from that direction and have going through that. And when he's flipping on the amplifier for the guitar at the beginning, and if one of the switches says klystron tube, it's like, well, I just made a system that uses one of those the other day. So it was pretty funny.
Sarah and I are nodding to ourselves just like, yep, he's in the geek speak. We can't understand any of it now. It's all going over our heads. But
Okay.
We kid. It's good that they have those nice little technical beats to it. But I remember seeing this in its initial release, and that was back when, to me, any science fiction movie, didn't count if it didn't have a monster or a spaceship in it. So I wasn't usually the one to impress, but I did love this one. I mean, there's no way you can't.
This would be considered science fiction.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
If it's time travel, it's science fiction.
I would
We
just
can't
say it's a
do
good
it.
old-fashioned comedy.
Well, and it is that too, a kind of dark comedy when we'll get into some of those elements later on. But it was released on July 5th, 1985. It was made for a budget of $19 million. Only grossed about $388 million that summer.
Wow.
Absolutely
Only.
huge hit.
A little bit of money, not much.
People seem to like it a little bit.
Apparently.
I can't understand why. There's nothing anyone could relate to in this film at all. I mean, Marty McFly.
Of course, it was followed by Back to the Future 2 and 3, filmed back-to-back, also giant, huge hits, and is now quite a beloved sci-fi trilogy, and one of the only movie trilogies that's pretty great through the whole thing. It never really dips, at least in my opinion. All right, let's go into the cast. Of course, Michael J. Fox, best known for Family Ties, and he was the first guy they wanted for Marty McFly. They originally couldn't cast him because of Family Ties. His commitment to that took over all this time, so, of course, they originally cast Eric Stoltz.
Right now, remember, there's it's either, I don't know if it was test footage or a script reading. It might have actually been full scenes.
No, it was
filmed
real
with him,
footage.
right?
They
The
filmed
DVD.
about a week, I believe, with him. And Robert Zemeckis, the director, originally decided the comic vibe he was giving just wasn't working. He was a little bit more serious, and it makes sense. Fox has this great kind of mischievous appeal as Marty that just makes the character really
And
work.
mischievous appeal without showing a lot of it. You see his character the first time, the way he's dressed, the way he carries himself. He's kind of like that time period, almost Bart Simpson a little bit. He's got the skateboard, he's got, the hall monitor that doesn't seem to like him, and he's always tardy for school. But the cool side of that is, the reason he's tardy for school is because he's hanging out with the crazy local scientist in the town. You know what I mean? Not normally the thing your rambunctious teenager's getting into in that moment in time.
Doc, what's going on? Where you been all week?
Working.
Where's Einstein? Is he with you?
Yeah, he's right here.
Doc, you left your equipment on all week.
My equipment. That reminds me, Marty. You better not hook up to the amplifier. There's a slight possibility of overload.
Yeah. I'll keep that in mind.
Or little touches that resonate later on, like when he's driving by the workout class and waves to all the women, or even when he's walking with his girlfriend and his eye gets drawn by some other girl walking by. When they finally were able to get him, he actually had to film the movie every day after he was shooting Family Ties. He'd film the day on Family Ties, run over to the set for this, film mostly at night, and then collapse at the end of the night.
How do you not get his scripts confused?
I don't know. Maybe there's some great takes of him, running into Doc. Where's Doc?
Whoops.
Einstein, where's Einstein?
Perhaps there's acting brilliance there that no one noticed.
And as Doc, we have Christopher Lloyd in what I think is probably his signature role.
Okay, doke.
He was that brings up he was Reverend Jim in Taxi. One of my favorite roles of his was Captain Krug in Star Trek III. He was Judge Doom in Roger Rabbit, also directed by Robert Zemeckis.
Judge Doom. Yeah. Horrifying.
I'm
Horrifying.
still angry at him about the shoe. I'll never forgive him for the shoe.
That is, I think, the second or third film I ever remember seeing. What was that, 88?
I believe so, yeah.
And I was 4 years old seeing that in a movie theater, a happy little Disney-esque movie for the kids. And I just remember the scene with the shoe and almost running out of the theater in sheer terror. Like one of the greatest movie villains of all time.
I've never seen this.
Oh, you got to see it. That'll be a topic of another podcast.
I saw it, but I was probably 10.
Did you ever watch Amazing Stories, the Amblin-produced TV show?
Yes.
He was in one, also directed by Robert Zemeckis, called Go to the Head of the Class, where he plays this insanely evil teacher. That's one of the craziest performances I've ever seen. If you ever have the chance to watch it, he is fantastic. He supposedly based his performance, certainly the physical look of it, on Einstein and Leopold Stokowski. But looking
at
it...
least I still have my hair.
Looking at it now, I can't help but look at him and not think of Rotwang, the evil mad scientist from Metropolis way back in 1925, with the crazy shock of white hair and the lab coat. The role was almost John Lithgow. They tried to get him for the part, but scheduling...
Oh, wow.
That would have been interesting, but...
I don't think it would have been the same.
It wouldn't have been the same.
John Lithgow, I either think of Dexter or I think of Santa Claus the movie. For some reason, the first two things that pop into my head.
And they were both in Buckaroo Banzai.
Yes, in Buckaroo Banzai. Big Boutte.
No, were you talking Santa Claus the movie, the serial killer one, or Santa Claus the movie with Tim Allen?
Santa Claus, no, not
with,
even.
With Dudley Moore and David Huddleston.
Which one is this?
That's the one that you still have to see as well.
Is there killers involved?
Yeah, no. This was the silly children's movie where Santa Claus was like a superhero.
Yeah,
welcome back to CinemaSpection, the show about movies Sarah hasn't seen yet.
It was by the Soul Kinds of guys.
That'll be another podcast.
Well, I wouldn't blame her for Santa Claus the movie. There's a lot of people who don't
Movie's
know about
friggin' bonkers.
Did I start watching it?
Yeah.
Okay. So.
But yeah, Lloyd is perfect. He has this great wide-eyed, cartoony energy to the part that's just fantastic.
But I need a nuclear reaction to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity.
1.21 gigawatts! 1.21 gigawatts! Great Scott! What the hell is a gigawatt?
And that brings me some of the greatest. It's weird to look back on a movie like this and notice things that are used for comedic purposes in movies nowadays. Kind of the self-aware thing that I didn't even realize this movie had until watching it tonight. Where there's at least 3 or 4 occasions where Doc Brown just looks at the audience.
Well, the big one is where
points at the audience,
where he says the movie's title. Yeah, Back to the Future.
We're going back to the future. It just looks right out.
Get it?
It's just so. Only could have been handled by him. He's just goofy enough to not take you right out of the movie.
Yeah, or the great pacing. Damn, where is that kid? Damn, each time pulling up a different watch or a different clock.
Damn.
As Lorraine, Marty's mother, we have Leah Thompson. Her first big role was in Red Dawn. After this was Space Camp. She's great in that one.
Space Camp is a fantastic.
And of course,
movie.
Howard the Duck.
Woo!
Which, silly as it
Sliced
is,
salami.
She looks great. She pulls off the huge 80s hair beautifully in that one. She was also in the film version of Dennis the Menace as Dennis's mother, and of course Caroline the City, her big TV show. And she is a lot of fun in this one. Just the contrast for her when the 1985 scenes when she's the middle-aged, overweight, alcoholic mom. And then,
oh my God, like pouring entire pints of vodka and pounding them just to deal with her horrible kids and her awful, awful husband who, not for nothing, but you make fun of shows like The Big Bang Theory, which is basically what I'd call a minstrel show for geeks, even though I love it. And then you look at the way that George McFly is portrayed in this movie, pouring entire things of peanut brittle into a bowl for his dinner while he works on his work. And it's just like, oh my God, this is just mean.
With her, though, just the thing she does with her voice has this horrible, ragged quality to it, like somebody has been drinking and smoking.
Right, and then you
throughout
cut to
whole
her
life.
young, and it's soft. I mean, basically every word that comes out of her mouth around her son is creepy, creepy swoon. You know, it's...
In the big reveal in 1955, when we first meet her again, it's, the lights are out and we just hear her, and she's still doing the 85 voice, and all of a sudden drifts right into her younger voice.
Been asleep for almost 9 hours now.
Had a horrible nightmare. Dreamed that I went back in time. It was terrible.
Well, safe and sound now, back in good old 1955.
1955? You're my mom.
My name is Lorraine. Lorraine Bates.
That brings me to a fun point. Sarah, having never seen this before, I noticed your reactions of horrifying unease during all of the scenes. Oh no, they're not oh god, they are going there. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I knew you told me coming into it that there's a thing with the mother falling in love with the son. That's the whole premise of the movie. But just some of the stuff they went there with was a bit
Well,
much.
when it gets to the kiss, yeah, I remember.
Or even the fact
you're kind of going, ah!
him in the bed with his pants off, and she just giddily like a kid, like, oh yeah, they're over there on my hope chest. You're just, what the fuck? Why did she take his pants off?
We don't know. We can
Never
imagine.
seen purple underwear. Why wear his pants off?
And the
She
funny thing
removed
is,
them.
I'm thinking he's like trying to hide under the blanket. I kept thinking, well, it's nothing she hasn't seen or will see down the road in the future.
My
so-
first thought was crap. I hope she didn't rape him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, terrifying.
But also back in the first scene we see her in '85 when she's at the dinner table giving this whole history of the family. I love this touch of regret she puts in there. It's like, I knew this is the guy I was going to spend the rest of my life with.
Right, and that same line comes back up at the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when it's just, it's amazing.
Well, she's also on Switched at Birth that we watched on ABC, and this is a different character for her because here she's well, it's actually almost similar because in that show she's a mother that's like, her husband's rich and she's, the prim, proper, straight-laced rich wife, and then she goes off the deep end and she starts doing dance classes and hanging out with the gay guy, so she does a 180 from where she starts, which is kind of like this, where she makes herself sound like she's a prude, and all of a sudden, no, she's not.
Yeah,
she's actually
that's true.
fantastic on that show. So, and it's something I knew she looked familiar, and we saw the trailer for Back to the Future at Cinema Salem, which is actually where we saw it tonight. And Sarah's like, that's Leah Thompson. It's just like, oh, okay.
Remember when the show started, they made a huge deal about her being on it, and I never got that. I'm like, what's the huge deal with her? Like,
Oh, big in the 80s. I remember having a huge crush on her after Howard the Duck.
Oh, Howard the Duck.
I'll have to watch more of her stuff.
For some reason, Howard the Duck will just always come up.
So that brings us to Crispin Glover, professional weirdo. One of his first big roles was in Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which is notable mostly for his absolutely bizarre dance scene.
Which is also noted as the Friday the 13th movie that Beavis and Butthead skipped because it said chapter and they thought it was a book.
He was also in River's Edge, What's Eating Gilbert Grape, the villain in Charlie's Angels, Willard.
The Thin Man, right?
Yep. He'd re-team with Robert Zemeckis to provide the motion capture for Grendel in Beowulf.
Yes.
And in Alice in Wonderland. That's the most recent thing. I was very surprised to see him in that.
He was good in it. He's
What
creepy.
role was he in that?
He was the Knave of Hearts. The horseback.
The weird,
creepy,
oversized
stretchy
knight.
dude.
Ah.
Looked like Mr. Fantastic.
And he's just an incredibly odd character.
Hasn't in like real life, and as opposed to the Crispin Glover in not real life, and didn't he befriended a bunch of like autistic people or people with Downs?
And filmed a movie with them.
And filmed a movie with them, and he's purchased like public domain books and scribbled all over them and resells them under himself as the author.
And he also led to a lot of changes in actors' residuals because of the sequels to this movie, where he did not want to come back as George McFly, and it changed the whole structure of those. And when they reused a lot of footage of him in there, he sued and won, and they had to get extra money, and they changed how that's
I didn't
calculated,
know that.
I guess, in Hollywood. So actors who have their footage reused and get an extra little bonus, they can thank him. That brings us to Thomas F. Wilson as the villain, Biff Tannen.
Oh, Biff.
Not a huge filmography. I remember him as this kind of funny jock character in April Fool's Day, the horror movie. He popped up in Camp Nowhere, also with Christopher Lloyd. And then I just finally got to see The Heat, and there he is as the chief that Melissa McCarthy is constantly tormenting through the movie. Yep.
That I didn't even realize till you just mentioned it.
Yeah.
Very iconic face. And that brings me, it's not perfect, but the makeup work in this movie when, everybody in 1955 and 1985 are playing themselves.
I actually wasn't sure if she was the mother as a mother, not when she was a teen.
Yeah, the Leah Thompson makeup is great, especially the way she wears it and moves in it.
And they both, her and Biff both have, and actually George McFly, have a different two versions of their 1985 selves. Mm-hmm. And the makeup is fantastic in both. It's really cool.
Yeah, Biff especially in his, in the standard 1985, the makeup, the wardrobe, the way he moves, it's just like, oh, I've seen and know so many people like that.
Right.
That in that middle age, just, I don't care how I dress, I'll wear these disgusting plaid pants and walk around with this beer gut and this terrible hairdo.
You can only imagine the wallpaper in his house, right? After seeing his character walk around.
Oh, they played Biff.
Yeah.
And supposedly a lot of his famous lines like the, what are you looking at, butthead, were things that Wilson kind of brought to the role himself and improvised. And now they're iconic and he uses them in pretty much every movie.
Hello!
Hello! He's also supposedly named for Ned Tannen, the former head of Universal Pictures, who had a contentious relationship with screenwriter Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis. J.J. Cohen was almost cast in the part, but when Stoltz was still playing Marty, it was decided he wouldn't really be large enough. They needed somebody bigger and more imposing. So he actually plays one of Biff's gang members, along with Billy Zane and Casey. Is he last name? I never know.
Billy Zane.
Billy Zane.
The Titanic.
He's one of the gang members.
Yeah.
I need to go back and watch that on Zoom or something. I didn't catch it.
Billy Zane, who shows up in everything.
And the one in the 3D
Did
glasses.
Did he have hair? Is that why I didn't recognize
He did.
him?
He had a full head of hair in that case.
That's why.
And Casey Ziamasko, I'm never sure how you pronounce his last name. I remember from 3 O'Clock High. He's the one in the 3D glasses. For supporting actors, there's also James Tolkien as Strickland, the principal, and that guy plays a hard ass in pretty much every role.
And in Masters of the Universe.
I was going to bring up Top Gun first, but that's Masters of the Universe.
Come on, Masters of the Universe.
Armed Dangerous. One of my favorite roles of his is just a vocal one. He's the voice of the Bishop of Battle in Nightmares.
Yep.
And there's Claudia Wells as the girlfriend Jennifer. Didn't get to star in Back to the Future 2 and 3 because her mother fell ill with cancer, unfortunately, so she had to drop out and was replaced by Elizabeth Shue. Didn't really have a huge career after this movie, unfortunately. This was kind of her big role. There were a lot of rumors after she didn't appear in the other ones as to what happened to her, but turns out that was the
real life just happened
story. Yeah. And for director, we have Robert Zemeckis. Who started off with little movies like I Want to Hold Your Hand. He did Used Cars with Kurt Russell.
Oh, Used Cars is so friggin' good.
Unfortunately, his first two movies didn't really make much money, so he had trouble getting this made until he directed Romancing the Stone, and that was a huge hit.
Have you ever seen Romancing the Stone, Sarah?
I've heard it.
It's really good. It's like Indiana Jones, but with different people.
Yeah. That's another one for the list. Did a ton of episodes of Amazing Stories, Death Becomes Her, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Forrest Gump, went back to sci-fi with Contact, Castaway, Beowulf, and just recently Flight. And for a while he was doing the motion
I've seen 3 of those.
And we can leave out A Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
A weird version of A Christmas Carol.
Which one? With Jim Carrey?
Yeah. Interesting point. Speaking of this movie, I having not seen this for a really long time, and you're talking about Robert Zemeckis and hit very varied film career, right?
Yeah,
with Zemeckis. But this movie and Forrest Gump have a lot of really interesting parallels, and a lot of things that I love about Forrest Gump that some people just think are silly. All of the silly ironies in the time, like the "Have a nice day" and like all that. This movie is full of that because it's all about little teeny tiny things you do in one portion of time that affect a future thing. Some of them kind of ironic, like Chuck Berry with the guitar music.
Yeah, Marty.
And some of them less
reinventing
so,
rock and roll.
And some of them less so involving Marty's family. But leaving out the on the nose stuff, going back to a time when storytelling, this movie does a lot of its storytelling visually. Especially in the very opening, you have a pan across of newspaper clippings on Doc Brown's wall that tell you his whole story. They tell you, rich family inherited the estate, sold the estate, for some reason, and then you find out a little later it was to invest in the time machine and get all that stuff.
And the mansion burning down.
And the mansion burning down.
The clocks, the Harold Lloyd figure on the clock there, which just comes into play later on.
Comes into play in the iconic clock tower sequence at the end of the movie. And
the news report on the TV, and then to Marty's skateboard rolling over and hitting the plutonium
plutonium,
case.
which is the first time I think I've ever actually noticed that tying in with the news report, as weird as that is, just how many times I've seen the movie. And, it brings us to great lines about, why these Libyans are after him in the first place. I told them I'd make them a bomb, and what I gave them was an empty shell casing full of used pinball machine parts.
I love the quality that gives Doc Brown this recklessness about it. There's that he's going to mess with these Libyans, that he'll use the stolen plutonium. That when he's testing out his machine for the first time, he ensures that he and Marty are standing right in its path.
Right in its path,
so
and
if it
puts his poor dog in the damn thing.
Poor dog, I had no idea what was happening.
No, but he was seemed to be cool with it.
Something was hanging on a clock?
Yes, so at the end of the movie when Doc Brown is hanging off the clock, there's a painting. So, and it happened. The painting, I don't know if they've altered it or the time in the movie was to match the actual time of the painting. But the painting was also the time they were showing on all the other clocks that they panned through.
Yeah,
it's like 10 of 8 or something.
It was like a novelty clock that had
novelty
a picture
clock.
of Harold Lloyd.
It's what's the name of the?
It's Harold Lloyd is the actor. It was from a movie Safety Last.
Oh, no, it was just like a novelty clock that looked.
It's a little figure of that character from that movie on the clock. It's kind of become a famous scene. In terms of time travel movies, there were plenty before this, The Time Machine, Time After Time, Somewhere in Time. This is one of the first to really introduce the whole time paradox idea to audiences. It's a huge idea to kind of wrap your brain around. I mean, even if you understand it, it can make you go in circles. I'm just trying to explain all the weird intricacies of it. I think it kind of became the model for how a lot of these are explained now in future films, like Looper or bad ones like A Sound of Thunder, things like that. Without this movie, there really wouldn't be a basis for audiences to get that, I think.
And actually, that was enough to, Sarah, you don't watch too many movies in this genre, so she was actually in the theater at the end when, spoiler alert, when Marty comes back and it was 10 minutes earlier, she's like, but why? Why is he there right now? And it was really breaking her brain.
It doesn't help that, if you've seen other time travel movies lately, like Men in Black 3, they completely piss all over the set rules of this.
Or X-Men Days of Future Past, which gets
I just expected him to appear right at that point, not be watching himself at that point.
Right.
That's what I thought.
And another spoiler alert, but with X-Men Days of Future Past, which gets around the entire thing by saying, oh, no, we're just implanting your brain into the prior you. There's no two yous existing.
Yeah.
Which gets through a lot of that explaining.
But this one, it holds pretty well. Obviously, by the end of the movie, he's completely altered time, which you'd think, okay, wouldn't that completely alter Marty's personality? Because he'd have a whole different alternate history of growing up. And for that matter, considering all
That's a good point.
The kind of butterfly effect idea of all the little intricacies and moments that would have to happen to cause him to be born, would he still be there? Wouldn't having changed the timeline the way he did just as much prevent his existence as accidentally interfering with it as it did before?
Well, and the parents, frankly, waking up that day and seeing their son, who obviously at the point that he reached, old enough to look like 18-year-old Marty, would have realized, this is that guy that we saw that played music at our prom.
That would seem like a very strange coincidence to
me. And some movies would go into a little wink to that. This one's just kind of like, you know what? No, we're not even going to touch that. Just forget. And I was talking about this with you guys earlier, and it's an amazing point. The fact that everything in this movie happens by chance. There's no grand plot. Yeah, Doc Brown built a time machine. That's really the only constant in the movie, is that Doc Brown is going to build a damn time machine. Other than that, there's no reason. Like, Marty doesn't say, oh, I can use this time machine to go back and fix my family and the problems with my dad. That just happens to happen by coincidence, by getting shoved back in this time. That's a random time picked by Doc Brown when he's just describing the past to Marty. And it's awesome that a movie can exist that way, where everything really is coincidental.
Well, unless, since they do leave it kind of mysterious as to how Doc hooks up with Marty in the first place.
Also true.
Idea that maybe, years later he encountered Marty and goes... Or no, but he encounters Marty and goes, I remember this kid. This kid's going to be important. I'm going to let him in and use the giant amplifier and blow up my garage.
Wouldn't he have remembered him from...
Well, then, current timeline, but how many times has this happened before?
That's the question. Was it like that?
There's like a circle thing going on there. Well, wouldn't him going back, wouldn't they remember?
Exactly. Well, we know that Doc does by the end of the movie, but
which maybe is why they don't have a backstory, because it would be too hard to have one, knowing that he saw him in the future, or in the in the past, and in the future. So maybe.
And this is why Sarah is a brilliant editor. She would have seen that in my screenplay and been like, no.
Well, yeah, it would have been kind of spoiled the ending to know exactly how he and Marty...
And Doc, King Exposition, just happening to know all of these paradoxes now, like little throwaways like Marty talking about, so my dad stood up to Biff, and it's the only time he's ever stood up to Biff. The only time? Kind of looks away.
Yeah, that moment of, never mind, it's fine.
Oh, never mind, it's cool.
Which comes into a lot more into play in the later movies. But what you're talking about with Marty in terms of going back and accidentally fixing all this stuff, if you look at his character in the beginning of the movie, he's a guy who gets no encouragement from almost anybody. I mean, the principal is like, you'll never amount to anything. Even his dad is like, it's probably best that you don't have the pressure of having to compete in this concert that he wants to be in. You don't need the headache. Nobody's really giving him any kind of spur to go on and do stuff, as a parent should for a child. The only one who does, we're told, is Doc Brown, who gives him that, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything.
So you'd almost say that instead of coincidence, it's like time was taking care of it, kind of making it work out for him.
Well, but also the idea that once he goes back, he almost fulfills the role of the parent for his parents, giving them the encouragement they need. He tells George, gets him the self-confidence to win Lorraine, because if you think about the way he got Lorraine in the first place, he never really had to work for it. He got hit by the car, she felt bad for him. He was almost a passive participant in this romance. And here, no, he actually goes out and wins her and builds his character as a result. But also, even the scene in the car with Lorraine where he's trying to get her, you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't smoke. He sees what she's going to become as a result of that. And I think maybe helps her veer away from that, as we see at the end of the movie.
And takes a really awkward scene and kind of gives it more of a point.
Yeah.
Because, Marty's entire plan revolves around, I'm going to attempt to force sex on my mother, and you have to come and stop me.
Well, I love that once he gets in there, he's like, I can't do this. He's
like kissing my brother.
And she's completely into it, which makes it all the worse. But there's also the encouragement he ends up giving Doc. I mean, up to that point, Doc is this...
And he's never built anything that works.
No, he's this complete crackpot. He doesn't think any of it worked. Finally, he sees this DeLorean and Marty and realizes, I'm going to do something great.
So, Marty, I'm going to be very sad to see you go. You've really made a difference in my life. You've given me something to shoot for. Just knowing that I'm going to be around to see 1985, that I'm going to succeed in this, that I'm going to have a chance to travel through time. It's going to be really hard waiting 30 years before I can talk to you about everything that's happened in the past few days. I'm really going to miss you, Marty.
And then that sadness in Marty in the realization that he knows that Doc is never going to actually get to experience his time machine.
Yeah, at the moment of his triumph, he's going to get shot and killed.
But maybe he was wearing the bulletproof all along.
Well, that's the interesting question of it. If when he first meets him in the parking lot, does he already have the bulletproof vest?
Yeah.
Since history changes after that moment, maybe not, but it's kind of hard to tell. I like that they filmed that scene that way, that it could be he already had it on there. We're not quite sure.
It could have been he survived the whole time. Yeah, exactly. We'll never know.
Bob Gale supposedly came up with the whole idea of this script after he encountered his dad's high school yearbook and looked at a picture of him and went, who is this guy? I mean, would I have hung out with this guy? Would I have been friends with this guy? And it kind of powers that whole idea of Marty learning about his parents and learning the things he didn't know, like the idea that his dad had a creative side. He wanted to do great stuff. He wanted to write, but just didn't have the confidence to actually do it the same.
What was the full title of the book? I didn't get to read it all.
The end of the movie?
Yeah. I think it was A Match Made in Space or A Match Made in the Stars.
Yeah, it's A Match Made in Time, I think it was.
I thought that was one of the best scenes when he's in the shop and he's looking at his dad. He's like staring at him like,
oh, yeah.
and the guy could be like none the wiser.
All of these actors, across the board, our main people, Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Crispin Glover, Leah Thompson, all great physical actors. The facial expressions, just fantastic. In the way most of Marty at the very beginning there, it's this kid in awe of running into his parents, and it gets pretty heavy, to use a line from the movie. Oh, is the gravitational pull of the Earth different in the future? No, it gets very heavy, you know what I mean, for him very quickly. And, but first being in awe of being in the 1950s, which, brings me to a great point. The town of Hill Valley is such an amazing character in this film. I mean, you think especially, it's a great period piece movie, for one thing. They get that look perfect. I mean, even shrubberies look different. The amount, it's a healthier looking world, which, it's just incredible.
The town sign, festooned with all these civic organization signs all over it, little things like that.
Right.
First, we talked about the city. That's probably one of the few times you'll see the 50s in color on a TV or movie. Every other time it's black and white.
And really vibrant color.
Vibrant
too.
color, yeah.
I was like, oh, so that's what the
Vibrant,
50s
like-
looked like in color.
It was like Pleasantville color.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is a movie for another time.
And I like how the 1985 version of the town is kind of worn out and distressed as his parents. Everything is dirty and grimy. There's garbage everywhere. Everything's seen better days. The high school has graffiti all over it.
Right. And a wonderful movieplex that was showing like first-run great films of the era is now a smut theater. What was it? Oh, I forget the name of the Orgy something.
All-American Orgy?
All-American Orgy, or...
Did that movie theater he crashes the DeLorean into look familiar?
No, well, maybe.
It's the movie theater that gets blown up near the end of Gremlins.
That's right.
That street is actually part of the Kingston Falls set. A little further back to the left of the Clock Tower is where the Dory's Tavern set was, too.
Interesting.
That set was actually used way back in the very first episode of The Twilight Zone. Where is everybody? If you watch that, I think it's Earl Holliman's the actor in that one. When he's wandering around this town, he passes right in front of the Clock Tower building.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I don't know about you guys, but when, he's seeing his parents for the first time, you almost forget that he's also seeing, like, grandparents and aunts and uncles until they say it.
Yeah, that's true.
And you're like, wait a minute, he's also seeing other family members, too, not just his parents.
Oh, and that's such a wonderful tie-in with Uncle Joey.
Joey.
And I mean, like I said, to speak earlier, just sometimes with Zemeckis, the stuff being a little too on the nose, but it all works so damn well here.
Well, you realize that the whole first act is setting up all this stuff, and it pays off one after another.
One of the most wonderful, I talked before, without any words spoken, Marty and George sitting next to each other making the same exact movements and gestures at the diner is just such a wonderful,
I didn't notice
wonderful.
The gestures.
They're both holding their hand the same way, and they both move, and like it's just unbelievable.
I was just noticing that Michael J. Fox was staring at his father in awe.
Well, and that moment when Biff comes in and says McFly, and
they
Marty
both
turns, and then he walks right by him to George, and that's the first moment of realization. And speaking of Glover's performance, I mean, you could get a lot of actors to play the stereotypical nerd, but he brings something so bizarre and off-kilter to the part. You can understand why this is the guy that some people would kind of shy away from hanging out with.
Your density.
The weird kind of lanky movements where his arms are just kind of going everywhere. The scene with him dancing at the Enchantment of the Sea dance in particular. He's just so odd.
He's like the good-looking nerd. Because he wasn't bad-looking, she's right.
Well, and that's the beauty of
right, he's not bad-looking.
The end of the movie where you see him, now he's self-confident and calm and his success, and his whole physical demeanor completely changes.
He's grabbing the mum's butt,
and
stuff like that. Yeah, it's great because they do such subtle things to make the character a different character, but it's still the same guy. They're still existing as George McFly, and it's really, really cool.
And it never really occurred to me that until now, the idea that the dynamics of how they met kind of flip. It started off with, she felt bad for him after he was hit by the car. And once he confronts Biff there, basically attempting to rape her, and she has that horrible scream, George, help me, and he realizes, no, I can't walk away this time. I have to try and help her.
And then he has to do it again on the dance floor.
Yep.
Right?
He was walking away.
He was walking away, but then he saved her. And then he's on the dance floor and he starts walking away from an even nerdier guy than him, taking his dance partner away, which one would start to wonder, how does that even happen?
Yeah.
But
I wish they had shown him have the moment of, I have to help her and turn around, rather than just cut to him doing it. That kind of threw me. I was like,
I do think they almost missed a chance for a joke there. The moment when he kisses her and Michael J. Fox suddenly sits back up, looks at the picture, and all three of them reappear. I thought it would have been funny if a fourth sibling suddenly appears out of nowhere.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
That would have been funny.
Let's talk about the time machine itself.
Insert photo of Lego DeLorean here.
It might quite possibly the most iconic time machine. I'm still partial to the TARDIS, but like he says, if you're going to time travel, do it in style.
Exactly. And it's such a funny gag because the DeLoreans kind of just disappeared.
Yeah, they ceased production around 83 because of all the financial trouble, and this kind of put them back on the map for a little while. In fact, years later, they started making modification packs so you could change existing DeLoreans to look more like this.
Oh, that's awesome.
Did Steve have a DeLorean?
Steve wanted a DeLorean.
I thought he bought one.
No.
He should, and change it into this. And now they have those touring ones that raise money for Parkinson's, which I always think is nice.
That's really cool.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's also perfect because, if you need something that's going to be mistaken for an alien spaceship, what better car than that?
Let's bring the sequence in the farm when he first transports to 1955, and the fact that is what lets him realize that he can pull a fast one on George later, pretending he's Darth Vader in his hazmat suit with the freaking Van Halen music and the hair dryer shoved in his belt. It's so good.
Not to mention the farmer is named Peabody, like Sherman and Mr. Peabody.
And Peabody's, this is another first time I realized that Doc was setting you up for that. He said this land, and that was one of the greatest nods to the audience. He was trying to breed pine trees. And just kind of stares off into the distance.
And the joke, the great joke, they don't put really much emphasis on that it's the Twin Pine Mall, and he comes back and it's the Lone Pine Mall because he killed the other tree.
That's right.
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
They don't really, nowadays they put the camera right on the sign so you can see it, but instead he just runs by it.
Is the bum on the park bench at the end Mr. Peabody?
No, well, the actor is George Buckflower. I seem to remember he's supposed to be somebody who was important in the past, but I can't remember who.
I thought it was the father. I bet you it is the former mayor.
He calls him Red, so
that makes sense. Yeah,
and he's one of those actors you see in everything. Especially he worked with John Carpenter in tons of stuff.
So how would the former mayor be?
Well, because Goldie Wilson eventually beat him in the election.
Because the town went to shit, and that's why you see the Goldie Wilson, who was working in the diner, where he says you could be mayor, and that was the whole thing. Is his whole campaign was to clean up Hill Valley because it went to such crap. So that would make sense to have the mayor sitting there drunk on the.
Because his middle name is Progress.
But he even said then when he's like, I cleaned this place up, it didn't need it then.
No, it didn't need it then, but that's the idea. It's kind of an allude to the future, you know.
Another kind of ontological paradox idea. It's like, all right, was he always going to be mayor? Is he only mayor because Marty put the idea in his head?
Right.
The other
chicken before the egg syndrome.
Yeah. Something really interesting I hadn't thought of before until I watched this time is that this movie actually has two climaxes. You have George finally beating up Biff and winning Lorraine's heart, and also, of course, the finale, which is so good they repeat it in every one of the sequels.
Yes, always has Doc showing back up for something. Oh, there's nothing like the train track DeLorean in movie number 3. We'll get to that.
Well, I also noticed that in the background there's a guy in a hat and coat that ties into part 2 where they kind of revisit that scene later on. I'm sure that wasn't intentional, but it's a nice little coincidence. In fact, they never really even intended to do a sequel to this movie. That ending was supposed to be just kind of a joke, and that's the end of the movie. Zemeckis said later on that if they knew they were going to do a sequel, they never would have put Jennifer Wells in the DeLorean at the end of the movie because it made a lot of trouble for them in parts 2 and 3.
That makes sense, yeah.
Well, we also have to notice a couple funny things like, well, we have Huey Lewis on the soundtrack, and then in the movie itself as the judge.
Yes, that's right.
Which is another cameo a lot of people didn't really notice the first time around.
Judge.
The judge of the Battle of the Bands thing at the school.
Oh, I didn't
comes up on the megaphone and then tells him he's too loud. Yeah.
I didn't even notice.
There's also the joke about when he's trying to prove he's from the future. It's like, who's president in 1985? And says Ronald Reagan. Then actually had to be approved by the White House before they could put it in the movie. And Reagan thought it was great. He loved it so much he made little references to Back to the Future in one of his speeches.
And there were so many great lines that revolved around that. It's like, well, if you have video recording devices like this for the future, the president must have to be an actor.
I like the cabinet lineup that he does after that. I suppose Jane Wyman is First Lady, and Jack Benny, whose whole comedy shtick was that he was a tightwad as Secretary of the Treasury. That's a great, tiny, obscure joke.
Oh, Jimmy, I like the JFK Road. What the hell's JFK?
Who the hell's JFK?
It's like one of those things you don't even think of that, oh yeah, nobody would know who this person is or what this incident means way back when.
I loved when he was at dinner with the aunt and uncle. Aunt and uncle, I think it was their grandmother and grandfather.
Yeah, his grandmother and grandfather.
Yeah, and
the
honeymooners, right? He's got the TV for the first time. All the jokes that come up there, he goes, oh, he's just joking. No one could actually have 2 TVs. And then when he calls it, he goes, oh, this is great, I saw it. He goes, saw it when? On a rerun. What's a rerun? This is happening now.
And it harkens back to the opening scene, not only because they're watching Honeymooners, but again, it's this family always in front of the TV.
Always in front of the TV.
I think it was the same episode.
It was, yeah. But I like this idea that at that point when they're rolling in the TV, it's a novel thing. We can watch TV and eat at the same time.
And yet they're still having a wonderful family meal, which when you tie into 1985, it's completely ruining them. You know, the father's eyes are either fixed on the TV or working, and you've got, God, some of the things in this, like the slacker son who's like a pizza delivery boy or working
he's working at Burger King.
Burger King, right? And then the horrible 80s stereotypical daughter that just isn't going to, overprotective mother and isn't going to amount to anything. And then you see their new future versions of themselves, and it's just
when did fashion
so on the nose.
switch? In the 80s, the guys had the tight clothes and the girls had the loose clothes. Somewhere it switched.
I don't know, but I'm kind of thankful for that switch.
Yes.
Perfectly honest.
And to speak of fashion, let's talk about Marty McFly's life preserver.
It's such a that
great joke has so much mileage.
It's a vest.
No. That joke has so much mileage.
And the cafe, the culture shock, is really beautifully handled.
Give me a tab.
Tab? I can't give you a tab unless you order something.
Right, give me a Pepsi free.
You want a Pepsi, pal? You're gonna pay for it.
Look, just give me something without any sugar in it, okay?
Something without sugar.
And a lot of it's so quick if you don't pay attention. These little, like when he has the soda and he's trying to figure out how to open it, and George just grabs it, uses the opener on the gas pump, and hands it back to him without even thinking about it. I also noticed when they have the model and they're doing the test run of how they're going to do it, and the car lights on fire, flies off into the oil cans. All I can think of, maybe we know if it's this kind of thing he's doing, why the mansion burned down in the first place.
Right.
Also, that in the opening of the movie, that Doc is basically living in the garage. That's the only thing that's
left.
Was left from the mansion, and that's all he has.
I didn't catch that.
And he's living next to a Burger King, and his little garage thing has Burger King like drinks and Whopper boxes all over the place too.
Right.
I didn't notice that.
I also read, I don't know if this is true, but because of the height difference between Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox, it's one of the reasons why Christopher Lloyd's always kind of hunched over in his performance. It's the only way they could get them in the same
And
frame.
that just adds so much oddness to the character. Like, it's really necessary. Oh, God, and freaking Christopher Lloyd's outfits. The future outfits, the best.
When he first shows up in the mall, Marty starts the line, "Hey, is that a Devo suit?" before he gets cut off.
A Devo suit.
Another great little 80s touch. Well, let's talk about the score.
Yes,
because this is a fantastic Alan Silvestri kind of iconic score.
Yes.
And
in a time period of very iconic scores,
Yep.
and this one still stands right up there, you know?
And it doesn't start until about 20 minutes into the movie when the DeLorean shows up. Until then, there's no real orchestral music. And then after that, we still have to wait until the chase scene before we get the main theme. And, oh, God, I love that.
And the chase scenes, I mean, there's a couple of them, right? You know, you've got your mall parking lot chase scene, which maybe for budgetary reasons is why we have it in there, but it's still pretty amazing. And then the skateboard chase sequence is just incredibly like old-fashioned perpetual motion machine style. Everything triggers something else type of sequence.
Yeah,
it was just done so well.
So well they decided to do it again for the second one
with the
up the ante.
hoverboard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Along with the manure gag that keeps coming up.
And the Back to the Future score, like you said, it's almost the soundtrack to the DeLorean itself, and that makes it really cool. At least when it first shows up, or first time travels anyway. Mm-hmm. I love the smoke. The smoke when the DeLorean is so overdone, and then why is it smoking inside?
Why is it always covered in ice when it comes back?
Just something weird with the time traveling.
Yeah, maybe it goes through some weird time corridor where everything's freezing. Or the scene where they go back to it after he's hidden it behind the sign and everything is foggy.
Yes.
The DeLorean's filmed so beautifully to keep this weird aura of mystery.
Otherworldly, almost like it's a spaceship. And you mentioned the score, and the usage of Huey Lewis's Power of Love in the opening. It's very subtle, but I love the movie starts with the song, with Marty like waking up, and then when he goes, it stops. Then the Battle of the Bands, he picks up right where the song would have been leaving off, playing the song with the Battle of the Bands again.
I didn't even notice
and then that scene ends, and then we go back to it again when he's outside, and it's just like it was very, very well done.
Yeah, and it comes up back in just as Jennifer was walking away from him. Yeah, I hadn't even noticed that continuity with that song.
We wouldn't have played the song from the beginning at Battle of the Bands.
No, that's the weird thing about it, is it really just picks up right where it would have been, and that's really interesting.
That is odd.
And the guy's playing it on the keyboard, even when he's walking up onto the stage, like he's tuning it up, but it's really the part of the song it would have been at, and I just thought that was really cool.
And then we get Marty playing on stage and mimicking like Angus Young and Pete Townsend and Chuck Berry. It wasn't actually Michael J. Fox doing the singing. Mark Campbell's doing Marty's singing there, but oh God, I love that version of Johnny B. Good. It's so catchy. I kind of wanted him to finish the song.
Was it Michael J. Fox playing the guitar?
No, I don't think he was playing the guitar either. But he certainly made it look good.
He definitely made it look like he was playing it, yeah.
Going back to the time machine, the original conception of the time machine was something very different. It was going to be a device built around a refrigerator that you had to get into that was driven into an atom bomb test site, and the atom bomb would explode and launch you into
But you don't nuke the fridge, Tim. You don't nuke the fridge.
Well, that's pretty much, everyone assumes that's where that came from. That Spielberg decided, we'll dust this off and put it in here.
Spielberg!
Where's that from?
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
It was decided at the time, having a movie that will be shown to kids where characters get into a disused refrigerator Probably not a good idea.
I loved...
Oh, Punky Booster took care of that, though.
Oh, God, yeah. Jesus.
I remember that episode.
Speaking of the plutonium, it was incredible. You know, he's got the nuclear waste handling hazmat suit coming out with the thing, and then, oh, yeah, we're fine. It's lead line.
Yeah, it's fine.
Like, what the fuck? He's such a great scientist,
I bet
yet
you get
such an
plutonium on the
idiot.
street corners back in the future.
Back in 1985.
No.
Well, you'd have to wait another 30 years before he could do that with Mr. Fusion there.
Oh, God, Mr. Fusion. That's such a great gag. He just pours the whole beer in from the trash before dumping the can.
Yeah, and then throws the can. Other little bits of Doc's character I love. I love the photos that he has, you know, Edison, Isaac Newton, Ben Franklin, and Albert Einstein. And these are his buddies at this point. He doesn't really have any close associates. He just talks to his pictures.
And when he goes and consults the photo, when he hears about 1.21 gigawatts...
I can't generate that energy, Tom, can I?
Why is it pronounced gigawatts, not gigawatts?
Because it's awesome.
It was somebody, they consulted a physicist or somebody who pronounced it that way, apparently. They figured, well, that's legitimate. We'll pronounce it that way.
Jigaboo.
Well, it works because of his character, though.
Yeah, and there's one bit of set dressing. I don't know where it comes from, but it fascinates me. Is in the garage scene, you see there's a saxophone hanging up on the wall.
Yes.
And I just had this great image of Doc just playing this bluesy saxophone when he's alone trying to ponder all these bizarre devices that he's making.
Oh, and speaking of bizarre devices, our first introduction to Doc Brown in 1955 with his mind-reading device. And Marty tells him all of this stuff. Couldn't give two shits less that he just told him he's from the future. It's like, yeah, that's all well and good, but this is horrible. Why? My machine doesn't work.
Yeah. And I like how you can see the design plans for that hang around in the background of later scenes, too.
And that's the things I was talking about, you know, at the very beginning. Their attention to detail on the science side, while it was still movie science, you know, they weren't far off, you know, from the way a lot of this stuff was supposed to look. It didn't seem jumbled, you know. It seemed like a crazy guy working out of his garage that just had all this shit. It's just awesome.
The whole Rube Goldberg gadget thing he does to turn on his TV and the coffee machine and
the toast
and
that
the
doesn't
dog.
quite work, which is very much homaged or alluded to in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yep.
With Rick Moranis' character.
Well, the coffee one in particular that strikes me as like a perfect metaphor for Doc. It's this amazing device will work automatically, but he forgot to put the pot in.
Yeah, he forgot to put the pot in.
That sums him up perfectly right there. And you were speaking about the machinery for the amplifier. I like also you can see CRM114 is one of the knobs there from tons of Stanley Kubrick movies. There's a lot of stuff we could
just. What does Kubrick have to do with this?
It's more like the director saying I like Stanley Kubrick movies.
Yeah, Bob Gale and Zemeckis were fans. Yeah. They love putting that into their movies in different places.
And the flux capacitor, can't forget that.
And the flux capacitor is fluxing.
Yeah.
Oh, the flux capacitor.
Or that detail that when he goes back and meets him, he still has the bruise from when he fell and hit his head on the toilet.
Yeah.
Well, it happened that morning.
Yeah, that's right.
That's why it's great that he still has it. You know,
The
movie didn't leave that key detail out though.
Yeah. I do have to wonder, looking at the heads-up display on the time machine, does that mean he couldn't go anywhere past a certain point? I mean, like could he do 65 million years into the past since there's not that many digit readouts?
I don't know. Doesn't have enough gigawatts, Tim.
Well, then he could go back to when Jesus was born. Well, December 25th, 0.
Well, December 25th, 0, 0.
Given how the dating
0.
actually works, I think he would have been disappointed. But I'd want to go see dinosaurs, damn it. If I have a time machine, that's the first place I'm going.
Hey, you gotta stomp on that butterfly. Change the course of time.
That would be the next scene. Damn it, Marty, we have to go back and fix it. Great Scott!
Great Scott!
A lot of other plot details we can't quite get into without spoiling bits of 2 and 3, which
we will do sometime.
We will do eventually, yeah. Well, any other thoughts on this one? Or?
Sarah?
I liked it. I don't know why it took me so long to see it. I'm very ashamed of myself.
Well, I'm kind of envious. You get to experience all this stuff for the first time that we've grown up with and know all the ins and outs of.
And think about being an adult kid, doesn't matter, in 1985 and seeing this movie. Like, this, like you said, the time travel paradoxes are just every movie that's come since this, that's done it the right way. Took it all from this.
Yeah, builds on this, at least in
and
terms
then movie
of film.
number 2 builds on it even more, which we'll talk about, of course.
Yeah, they've been doing this stuff in sci-fi literature, but in film, this was new to do it to this
and
degree.
it handles it so well.
Yeah,
it handles it in such an approachable way, should I say, where the audience can get pulled into it, but you you don't really have to be fully bought into the sci-fi side of it as long as you get the character stuff.
And it's breezy and quick enough that you don't have time to linger over the questions and kind of the plot holes of it. Okay, if this happens, how would you remember this? How would this work? That kind of stuff. It moves fast enough that you're just like, okay, yeah, I'll accept it. It's fun. We'll move on.
Yeah.
And to end on a fun note, something great about Marty's appearance being changed would have been great for the Return to the Future. Whether it's his clothes are different, whether it's some gag, he goes into the thing and, his underwear aren't Calvin Klein anymore. So I don't just thinking about his mother seeing him in his underwear, so none of them are Calvin Klein anymore. It would have been really, really interesting.
Yeah.
I can imagine her doing the laundry and looking at it and going, wait a minute, why is this familiar all of a sudden?
I knew a man that looked just like my son named Calvin.
I knew Calvin Klein way back when. I should have got together with him. He's a multimillionaire now.
Or you see the mother's license plate drive by and we have a little bit of a, oh God, what was that movie called? With the father and son ham radio movie.
Oh, Frequency.
I have one word for you, Yahoo. Remember it. You don't see the license plate. So all of a sudden the mother's like a Calvin Klein conglomerate.
Alrighty. Well, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. Hope you enjoyed Back to the Future. And we'll talk to you soon with new movies.
Great Scott, that was fun.